So I am going to start streaming and we shall see. Yes, it looks like we are live. Let's hope that we are live this time. Does everybody hopefully see me or hear me? Please tell me if you can hear me. That would be really wonderful. I am doing a totally different kind of stream this time, and I cannot tell because I'm, woohoo, good. I see people say on the 5. On the 5, thank you. Do you hear me as well? That's the critical thing. I am doing a completely different type of stream, and I'm using a totally different method than I've ever used, and I hope that it is, yes, sound. Good. Is it loud enough? I hope it's loud enough. Let me know how I come off. So this is just kind of like a workaround that I created very quickly. So if I seem a little bit out of sorts, it's just because my mind's like on half a dozen different things and looking at things differently than I've ever had to. But hey, at least I've got it solved for now. Good. Thanks, you guys. I appreciate you jumping on despite my slow start and all my issues. YouTube, every single time YouTube changes something, they don't really let any of the users know. So something that worked just fine breaks, and then you have to fix it, and then it breaks again later down the road. So that's what I'm struggling with now, is my audio keeps breaking. So I think I've worked it around, found a workaround that no matter what YouTube does, at least in the short term, I'll be okay. Anyway, so hello everybody. I'm so glad you're all jumping on. Thank you for being patient with me. I appreciate it. Hopefully Mike Richardson is in. Oh, good. And Jerry Ryan. I do see Jerry's in here. Jerry is one of our moderators and a VIP at Patreon. So thank you, Jerry, so much. I know Mike had mentioned he would be on as well, and I hope he'll jump back on with us as well. So thank you guys so much for coming on. I decided to do a live briefing. I had mentioned it to everybody on Patreon that I would do it, and I think I even put it in the description of my last forecast, because we just had that big X-class flare when I was basically buttoning up the last production, and I said, okay, well, I'll make a guess, and you know, kind of go about January 20 or February 20th is when the solar storm will hit Earth, and sure enough, that was about right. Obviously, it is hitting now, believe it or not. Sadly, it's a fizzle, and it will likely continue to be a fizzle, and we will talk a little bit about that. So all of those doomsayers out there that were saying, oh, this is the kill shot because it's an X-class flare, and look out, everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket. No, this is a classic example of having a massive solar flare and a fizzle of a solar storm. And it's not even, the fizzle of the solar storm is not even just because it was a glancing blow. It's because the magnetic field is completely northward. I mean, if this were a completely southward pointing magnetic field in this solar storm, we'd actually have some pretty good aurora right now. And I'll talk about that. And I'll even make a comparison with the Valentine's Day storm, so you get to see what we're talking about and why the Valentine's Day storm had, all of this wonderfully beautiful red aurora, and this storm, you don't even notice it's hitting us. This one has turned out to be a bumper car, and there's a very good chance that it'll continue to be a bumper car throughout the duration that we have it. So let me get away from the sun here and actually talk about what's going on. And do I have? And I may have to rewind this a little bit if we want to see the lifting off of the storm that caused the Valentine's Day eruption. You know, that eruption that caused the Valentine's Day storm. I'll have to back this up a bit more. I didn't include this in the looping image that you see here, looping movie that you see here. But it's really not all that exciting. It'd be kind of a downer just to show it, because you can hardly tell it's a solar storm that was being launched. But of course, the X-class flare was massive, right? We had this really beautiful eruption here from region 3229 back on the 17th, late on the 17th. You'll see it here in just a second. You can't really miss it. Boom, right there, even in this wavelength. And immediately when it happened, I knew, I mean, this is when we were basically in the midst of all the Valentine's Day storming. And so we were getting lots of beautiful red aurora, and because of the way that storm was configured. And everybody's like, oh, cool, we're going to get another big event. And you know, it turns out, no, we're not. Now, I'll let this thing reset, but what I'll show you is I'm going to wiggle this back and forth. And the reason why, and I'll get out of the way, is because when you see this eruption, okay, I'm going to do something called swing. This is what scientists do a lot. Can you guys see the blast wave? Watch. Whoosh. Do you see that blast wave? All right, I'll back up again. Whoosh. See, it propagates clear out here. What you're looking for is kind of like a dimming, like everything kind of getting softer, like a darker. Do you see it? Watch. Before and there it blasts after. You're actually evacuating some of the big magnetic field overlying, what we call the overlying magnetic field that's kind of over all of this structure. And when you evacuate all that, right, and you lift it off and move it out, well, some of that trapped stuff that was in there gets lifted off, and it's kind of like, you know, wiping the fog off of your lenses. You end up seeing deeper into the upper corona and the atmosphere. And so you end up seeing, it ends up being darker. You end up blasting out some of that stuff that was kind of, you know, reflecting, I don't want to say reflecting, but emitting light. And so that stuff's gone, so things look a bit darker. Well, and you're opening up some field lines too, and I won't go into the details of that too much, but you can see this. We call this an EIT wave. It was named after the telescope that first showed EIT waves on SOHO, the extreme ultraviolet imaging telescope, EIT, yeah. So that was why it was called EIT wave. It really is like a big blast wave. The reason why I'm showing it to you is that as soon as I saw that blast wave propagate past mid-disk, past center disk, I knew this thing was probably going to hit Earth. Didn't matter it was a LEM event, and I know, Lisa, you mentioned something like, wait, how is this? I'm confused. How is this going to hit us if this is a LEM event? Because savvy people know that LEM events don't typically hit us. True, except when they're big, right? So this was a big event, right? It makes sense. It was an X-class flare. But whoosh, you had this big blast wave that came out this far, and I knew, okay, this thing is going to hit us. And at the time, it was kind of like, okay, what is your best guess? Well, typically with these big events, 3 days. I mean, it's silly, but back of the envelope calculation, about 3 days for these structures to hit us, especially if it's what we call a flanking blow, not something on the apex. We're just hitting the side of it. So I figured the 20th. So for those of you who actually watched my previous forecast, and I had that big bar above my head that said, hey, you know, preliminary indications that this structure is going to hit us on the 20th. Yeah, that ended up being what happened. And I'll go to that in just a second. Interesting thing to note, though, is that this region 3229 is still with us. It's still an X-flare player. It's kind of calmed down a little bit. But what was driving it to be an X-flare player is some funky stuff bubbling and gurgling underneath the surface in this region of the sun. And so when you notice there was another big M-class flare today from region, what's now labeled 3234. And that region, where did it fire the M-class flare? Well, right here. And one of my colleagues thought, Space Weather Mike actually, thought that this might actually be an X-class flare, and I think it actually shows it. Do you see another pop? Maybe not in this wavelength very well. Come on, show it to us. Oh, do I not have it on this? Did I not go far enough? SDO, come on. 2011-18, oh, maybe it didn't. Maybe I didn't have this silly thing. How come it didn't? Let me exit full screen here. Let me get wonder why, maybe I went too far back. I'll go to the 18th now. 2021, there we go. Let's load this up again. See if it'll give me actually more data this time. At any rate, so there is a new region. There's a new sheriff in town, and that's region 3234, and it has just been rotating in the sun's east limb, and it fired a big M-class flare. Will I expect to see more? Yeah, it could give us another big one. You can see it here, just giving us, you know, making a big holler. There it was, pop. That was the little short-lived M-class flare. Will I expect to see more big flares? Possibly, until it rotates to about here, and then you'll watch that X flare, the big flare risk, kind of die down a little bit, because there's just something underneath the surface right here that's causing issues. And we probably will see it in the south too, because of what we call conjugate. There's like a conjugacy. Oftentimes at a single longitude, you will see activity both in the north and in the south. And we'll talk about that in a sec, because I'm going to flip to stereo, because there's another active region over here down in the south that isn't rotated into view yet that is really worth watching. Man, it let off a beautiful, beautiful storm, beautiful CME. just recently. Anyway, okay, so we are getting hit by the big storm here. We're going to watch this one because this one's also giving us some trouble. This one's actually going to give us more trouble now as radio noise is concerned. This is going to give us more trouble than this one, and probably will over the next few days easily. Now, region 3226, this is another big region. This is the biggest one when you look at the Earth-facing disk in the magnetic configuration, what we call HMI. This is the biggest of all of the regions. This one's rotating to the sun's far side. Within a few days, that's going to cause that solar flux to really drop because, as you see, it's beginning to move away. We're not going to get enough replacement for solar flux to stay up near the high to about 175 or so. It's going to probably drop maybe as far down as to the 150s. Which reminds me, when people ask me, a lot of people ask me that SWPC in the middle of the 17th or the 18th caught, yeah, the 17th, because that was when this one had that big X flare. Solar flux jumped up to 300s. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It was just that we had a lot of transient just emission, let me put it that way, from that source region. And so when they took their daily measurement of solar flux, well, it was enhanced by a lot. So if you notice, the very next day it dropped back down to the 170s or 168 or something like that. So don't worry, that's perfectly normal. When we have a really big flare that then and solar storm launch, that part of the sun is like a scar, and it just takes a while for it to heal. And as it's doing that, as it's repairing itself, there's a lot of magnetic reconfiguration, and that lets off a lot of light and a lot of energy. And so it enhances the solar flux, but it's temporary. Okay, so don't worry about that. All of that was normal. That was not an anomaly. It just happens to be when they take their once daily solar flux measurements, it just happened to be while that was still calming down. Something else to notice, here is a small coronal hole. See this? We're going to get a little bit of enhancement from that on the tail end of this solar storm Fizzle that we're dealing with. And I'll show you the 5-day outlooks. We'll see a little bit of that. We're also probably going to get a little bit of enhancement from the fast wind from this region as well coming up. And are we expecting a lot from it? Nah, not really. Probably more of the same. So kind of lackluster. We're more just kind of in a hurry up and wait mode now when it comes to more activity, at least for aurora photographers. So I do apologize in advance, aurora photographers, if you guys wanted more of the Valentine's Day fireworks. You're not gonna, sadly, you're not gonna get it. Let me stop this for a moment and just orient you with the magnetic field here. So believe it or not, the Valentine's Day storm was something that was launched kind of right in here. It was launched between these regions. This is the big boy right here. This is region 3226. This is why, as it rotates to the sun's far side, why we're going to see a drop in that solar flux. This is one of our remnant X-flare players. It's really kind of not much of that anymore. It's kind of winding down. Here is region 3220, whoops, as it resets. 3229, right when it was launching its X-flare, looked really nice and I don't want to say nice, but active. As it's rotated more towards center disk, it's quieted down. Now, region 3234, which is over here, that's the same thing's going to happen to that one. So it may be super exciting right now, and it may look really cool and really magnetically complex, but watch, it'll probably calm down as things, as it continues to rotate to center disk. The reason for that, again, is because there's something going on underneath the surface that's causing more magnetic complexity to rise. Remember, these are like submarines. They poke up through the surface of the water and then they disappear. And when more stuff pokes up through the surface, things can get magnetically very complex, which is what we're looking at as a magnetic map. And the colors show opposite polarities going in and out. And just like American politics, if red touches blue, there's all sorts of crazy fireworks. That's when you get big flares. Just think of American politics when you think of red and blue, and you'll always know that's where you just don't like it when those different colors are touching one another. But it's definitely already, as it even comes and rotates further into view, it already looks like it's calming down a little bit. We got a little bit of something in here where red is close to blue, but I'm just not seeing a lot of emergence. We got a little bit here as well, but things are definitely dying down as time goes on. So I think this region's going to continue to, both 3229 and 3234 are both going to calm down. And the big players that we have, and as soon as I get through this, then I'll stop and take a look at you guys' questions and stuff. I just wanted to get through the sun bit first. What I want to show you here is something that we haven't seen yet coming through the sun's far side. And there is a question. Let me make sure this is going to move at the right speed. Yeah, that'll probably work. Shoot. There. Let me stand out of the way. Okay. So down here, this is stereo A, and it's looking at the sun from the side. Do you see that? Did you see that big massive thing that got let go? So right now, there's something on the far side of the sun that's just beginning to rotate into stereo's view over the last day. And it is likely another big M-flare player. I haven't checked to see what returning region this is, but I believe it's one of the returning regions. And yeah, you can kind of see that big solar storm that it launched. The question for this region, as it begins to rotate into view over the next maybe day or two, is how much solar flux is it going, what's it going to raise in terms of the solar flux? Is it going to be a big contributor? I don't think it's going to be a little bit. It's going to prevent that solar flux from really dropping as this region rotates off of the disk. But it's not going to, boost us back into the 200s, at least not yet. And then also the second big question is, when you see this, I'll wait for it to reset and I'll point out the big solar storm that it launched again. Right here, watch it. You can see the edges of it. Ready? Whoosh. Do you see that? There's like this big bubble. It was very beautiful. And then it has these huge post-eruptive arcades, these big like little solar slinky sitting, and I'll show you, little solar slinky sitting kind of like that, when you saw that, like a slinky sitting there. That is a very large solar storm, and that will, that could mean that there's not much left of this region. So when it rotates into view, it may already be dead. It may already be just kind of a quiescent thing, and it's already kind of, let go of its fireworks. I can think of a more colorful way of putting it, but I won't. So we'll pay attention to it when it rotates into view. I think SWPC will raise the M-flare threat risk when this region rotates into view, but I'm not sure by how much, because again, it may have completely destroyed itself and consumed itself during that solar storm launch. And it's a beautiful solar storm launch on the outside, on the far side of the sun. The neat thing is, I think solar cycle 25 finally is taking off, because we're seeing these massive solar storm launches now, right? We just saw one that is fizzling at Earth because it really didn't hit us the right way. And now we're seeing this one here too. That's a good sign. That's a good sign that we really are beginning to climb to solar maximum. I'm kind of happy about that, so that we're not, I don't think anybody can say that we're going anywhere near a grand solar minimum, too far down in terms of solar flux or sunspots or anything like that. So I think that's great, and I do think it's going to continue to be a better than average cycle for solar flux. So not a cycle 19, but better than a cycle 23. Okay, going to be higher than that, so that'll be good. Okay, and then I can get into the particulars of, I'll go back here. We can get into the particulars of the solar storms here in just a moment. But what I'll do is I'll probably flip to 5-day outlook so you guys can see what's going on, and then we can get into the details of the solar storms if you'd like. So let me say hi to everybody. Yay, I made it back. Yes, Ryan, thank you. Yeah, I do have audio, I know. Crazy, huh? Propagation has been good lately. I see that, David. Yeah, and it will continue to be. And honestly, the radio propagation, the radio blackout should kind of die down just a little bit. Shame red won't work with blue anymore. I know, isn't it terrible? Yeah, thank goodness I'm not political. I'm kind of sit in the middle, so I just kind of watch everybody. I just stand on the fence and laugh at them both, because they're both... Okay, good. I'm glad my audio is okay. All right, do we need tinfoil hats? No, we can relax, breathe a sigh of relief. That crazy X-flare it's a fizzle. It turned out that the solar storm is a fizzle, and I'll go into the details about that in a moment. You'll have a headache tonight, and you don't normally get a headache. Well, the solar storm is still hitting Earth. It is, and it is still causing the geomagnetic field of our Earth's field to wiggle a little bit. But it's acting more like a bumper car than it is actually pumping any real energy. The only way it can really cause us problems is just through density, boing, 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 and it's causing pulsations and things like that. But it's not really pumping a lot of energy into our system. So just know that and sometimes that can be very good for radio propagation, by the way, on Earth's day side. You guys might notice propagation bumps up and can kind of withstand even some of the radio blackouts that we have, simply because it just seems to stabilize. When we have northward magnetic field, it seems to stabilize the upper atmosphere for some reason. Oh, the handy slinky prop was pretty. Thank you. Yes, it's a slinky I dipped in white paint for my students at Millersville, because otherwise on my green screen it disappears, right? It takes on the color of green because it's a silver slinky. But yes, when I use my mini courses, which I'm going to get back to starting this month here, I use my slinky quite often. Yeah, there we go. Slinkies are fun. It's fun for a girl and a boy. You bet it. You bet. And I always use it. So, could that X flare have caused problems for jet flights? Yeah, that long duration flare, and we'll talk about that in a second, and I'll show you the difference. Why that particular flare was, you could tell there was a big solar storm that was associated with it, compared to the little tiny M-class flare we had. It wasn't tiny, it was like an M4 or 5 or something. But it was short-lived. It was what we call impulsive, and so it did not have a CME. It did not have a big solar storm launched, and we'll talk about that. Does solar storms affect brain waves? Well, man, if you're in the sensitive grouping, there are lots of people who would say yes. There are people who are very sensitive to electromagnetic fields, and our Earth's magnetic field it's a magnetic field. It's right, so it's part and parcel of the same thing. And there's just a lot we don't know about medicine yet. We're working on a database of peer-reviewed medical papers that do research in this area, and there's not a lot of research yet. Well, relatively speaking, there's like 600 papers that we're trying to comb through, so that's a lot. But there's not a lot of research in terms of robust research, because a lot of the medical professionals don't know who to talk to. They want to talk to astrobiologists, which really is, they need to talk to heliophysicists. And so that side of research is really just beginning to ramp up. It's hard to say as of yet, but stay tuned. We're working on it. Okay, guys, let me... you got me hooked on the slinky. What I'm going to do, let me show you, just so that people who are here only for the forecast, whoops, hello, and I don't want to slow them down. Let me get to my 5-day outlooks. What I'm trying to figure out is why is my computer hot? I don't know. Okay. I was making sure all my movies were turned off. So, pardon me. No, it's not raining in space. I accidentally rendered my 5-day outlooks, because I'm still trying to learn how to use these new ones, with a little bit of accidental rain. So maybe it's raining because we're all crying. Here we go. So this is my the aurora outlook at high latitudes. I'll do high latitudes and mid latitudes, and I'll probably just make it loop here, so it just continues going on and on. All right. So it'll switch to mid latitudes, but this does have SWPC's forecast for today included. So at high latitudes, we're only expecting, only expecting active conditions, and that's for the solar storm that we're anticipating. Pardon, it's going to go to mid latitude for a minute. Only because the solar storm that we're having right now is really pretty much a fizzle. So at high latitudes, we still could get active conditions. And I'll just go ahead and start it over. So aurora could be visible at high latitudes. Won't be that great. It'll be just kind of iffy, maybe. And this should be a G0, my apologies. And then tomorrow we're going to be looking for, the next day we're going to be looking for some fast solar wind, because we do have that small coronal hole that's going to be rotating through the Earth strike zone. So at high latitudes, again, it's going to stay active, and then we're going to continue to move into the fast wind. So we have that wind that's going to hit Earth and cause what we call an interaction region that then could give us some decent impact for a while. So we can get a bump up in aurora and then last for a day or so, and then things will calm down. At mid-latitudes, we really are expecting unsettled conditions. Again, we're having aurora watch, but only about a 15% chance of a minor storm. And then we go on to the wind watch because we're expecting to have that fast solar wind come and hit us pretty soon. About a 30% chance of active conditions over a few days, and then things will settle down to about 15% chance. Again, because we have that one set of wind, and then there's also another bit of fast solar wind from the polar coronal hole. So here I actually have two sets, both here and on Saturday. We're expecting maybe an extra bump up. So when you see this icon, know that you could have a little bit more activity. About a 40% chance, in fact, of a major storm at high latitudes as we wane from that, the impact from that solar storm into the fast solar wind. And then we get that other solar wind impact, which will bump us up a little bit. But at mid-latitudes, not so much. It's going to be a lot softer. This is probably the only wind that might bump us and give us some level of aurora possibility, but probably that polar wind is not really going to do much for us. It's just going to keep us kind of unsettled with only, a little bit of a chance of activity, but likely not much, especially in the way of aurora. And I'm so sorry. I wish that had been, I wish that the aurora had been much, much better than it was. And that's why the sky is crying. You can see the rain. I'm sad. All right. Anyway, I'll stand out for just a second in case you guys want to take a look or snapshot or something like that and hang on to that. Yes, this does have, these do have the high latitude and mid latitude, the NASA, oh my goodness, the NOAA SWIPSY 3-day outlook, official outlook for today that they released just a few hours ago. And that has that included. And then, of course, I always extend it to the 5-day. So hopefully that gives you some nice look there. And then what I'll do now is I'll go to the other movie with my other 5-day outlooks. See, I've got new 5-day outlooks. I hope you guys like these new 5-day outlooks. I have to find it. I thought I had it up. I guess I didn't. There we go. So this is your solar flare, and in this case, a solar flare and dayside radio blackout outlook. And yes, this also has the 5-day, or the NOAA SWIPSY's forecast in there. So we're expecting a solar flux right about 158. That's about where it stands now. We're going to dip probably down to the mid to low 150s before we begin to climb back out at the end of the weekend. And this is because of those new regions that are rotating, in from the far side. Like I showed you, the one that had that very big solar storm that just was launched. This may actually climb a bit more, depending upon how that, how active that region is going to continue to be. And we'll get back to that in a second. I'll also talk about here we're expecting for radiation storms, we're still sitting at the D1 normal range. There have not been any radiation storms despite the big solar flares. So we're still sitting at the S0 level. Okay, that's the quiet level. And but we have about a 15% chance of an S1 or an S2 radiation storm over the next 5 days. That's because we do have that region 3226 that's rotating to the west limb. And then by the time it's over, it's done, then we have other regions that are beginning to rotate, like 3229. That will be rotating to the sun's west limb. And when it does that, well, then we're going to have, that means we are going to, once again, have radiation storm risk that's a little bit higher than we'd like. So, we might as well just, keep it up 15%. But we just haven't been seeing a lot of radiation storms recently, and not really sure why that is. As far as solar flares are concerned, we're sitting at moderate noise levels. We are expecting about a 50% chance of an M-class flare. Oh, look, I don't have an S. How funny. Which is a R1 to R2 level radio blackout. So 50% chance of that. And we even have about a 15% chance of an X-class flare. And that is easily going to be over this next week. Let me go back. I'll pause it. Stop. Okay. That will easily be over the rest of this week. Again, partly because that new region 3230, well, not 3234, it's already rotated into view, but the one in the south, that may be 3235 or 6, I forget what number it might be. But that one is really kind of the big question mark as to what really this is going to be. I went ahead and said that we might drop back down to a 10% chance of an X-class flare starting around Friday and into the weekend, so things will get down. I still think the noise level will still be pretty moderate. I don't think it's going to be too quiet on Earth's day side, just because we do have so many other regions. And there are more active regions that will be rotating into view, and I'll talk more about that as we go into a longer, the more detailed part of the forecast. And again, I think I went through all of this enough for you. Yeah, I went ahead and instead of bringing this down, I went ahead and kept it at 15% chance, just because I think by this time we will have region 3229 past mid-disk. And as the regions rotate to the sun, the west side of the sun, that's when radiation storms become a bigger risk for us. So I'm just going to keep that radiation storm risk up at 15%. If you are a pilot, definitely check the ICAO space weather advisories. I'm sure they're having them, because we do still have a decent chance for a radio blackout, and then of course the radiation risk as well. So stay apprised of that. And I think that's about it when it comes to the actual forecast. Then I can go into the details of the forecast as time goes on. Do you guys have any questions on the short bit of the forecast before we do some of the deep dive about what's going on with this storm? Why does it suck? Why can you have an X-class flare and then have a storm at Earth that is just pathetic? It's like the actual opposite of a kill shot. Well, that's because they're not the same phenomena, right? Don't judge a solar flare. Don't judge a solar storm by a solar flare. It's a bad idea. Okay, Lisa, you say on the Enlil graphic, oh yeah, the sun has a red and blue around it indicating IMF polarity. Is there a pattern to flares firing off between IMF polarities? No, there's not for solar flares. And if we talk about solar storms, it's debatable whether or not you can predict the orientation of a solar storm, because the heart of a solar storm, it's my favorite thing, is a slinky. And so these have very predictable patterns. But the question is, do you see the core of an ICME or a CME when it launches and then it reaches Earth? We call it an ICME. Do you see the core of this? So can you see the part that's predictable? And then on top of that, once it launches, it may launch in a particular configuration, and you can see it launching from the sun looking a particular way. But then it encounters traffic on the way to Earth, and so that traffic can twist it or contort it or cause it to do cartwheels. There's all sorts of things. So how much distortion has that then caused this structure by the time it reaches Earth? So those are problems. And then the other problem is, of course, when you have an event like what we had here, where and I'll show it more in a moment, where the structure went off mainly to the east of Earth, and you just get the flank of this structure. You're not going to probably even see a slinky structure at all. You're just getting what we call the envelope of the structure. And anything goes when it comes to the magnetic field there. Now, is there a chance that we could possibly still see part of that core? Maybe. It depends upon how large it is, because it's a big storm. So, and we've only gone through about the first half a day, about 12 hours of it. So we'll see, and I'll get to the solar wind field here in a minute. So hopefully that helped answer that question, because solar flares really aren't connected magnetically to. When we talk about the magnetic field of the solar wind, we're really not. It is, although it is connected to the sun, obviously this is the sun's magnetic field that's blowing off into the solar wind, so you can kind of map it outward. But having polarities that you're trying to say something about a solar flare occurring and then trying to connect that to the polarity that you see in a magnetic model, they're two different type of phenomena. They're really hard to connect together. So hopefully that answered that question. It's not a good idea. Dave, you said I have lots of people who are pilots and some commercial pilots. Yeah, hopefully make sure they look for those ICAO advisories, especially if they're flying anywhere near the poles. That's a big deal right now. Some folks don't understand SFI. Can you explain it easily? SFI, so we're talking about the solar flux index. So when we're talking about solar flux, we're not talking about flux that is That is like the same thing as TSI, right? TSI is total solar radiance, meaning the entire spectrum of light that comes off of the sun. And we're talking about from basically gamma rays all the way down to radio waves. That would be TSI. Our sun is yellow, therefore its spectrum peaks, the biggest, the brightest color, so to speak, of that light. You know, all of the light that comes off of the sun is yellow. It's visible range in the yellow range. But the sun also has all these other wavelengths of light that, you know, some of them we can't even see unless we're in space, right? That's why the sun looks so fuzzy in space, and on the ground it looks like a yellow ball. And so because our atmosphere actually blocks some of those wavelengths from reaching the ground. Nonetheless, they exist. And the solar flux index is just a small portion of that spectrum. It's actually a radio spectrum, 10.7 centimeters, which is, it's a radio, what we call radio flux. And so, yes, it's a frequency of light, and what we use it for is a proxy mainly to determine how much it's affecting our Earth's ionosphere, because it's a historical marker, it's an historical index. Big cycles can have solar flux numbers, you know, easily in the 300s. The last few cycles really, you know, if you're hitting 200, you're pretty high. And solar minimum, you're sitting in numbers that are as low as mid-60s, you know, mid-60s, low 60s sometimes. That's pretty low. That's when there's no sunspots on the disk and the sun is basically sleeping. So once we get to about 100 in the solar flux index and the solar flux numbers, you're sitting at basically what I call good propagation on Earth's day side. It means pretty much most frequencies above maybe 10 meters and above are well, you know, you can use them pretty well. And then poor radio propagation really starts between 80, when you start dipping into the 70s, below 80 and start getting lower. That really means radio propagation gets really tough on Earth's day side. So those solar flux numbers really are good markers for amateur radio operators to kind of know how the radio propagation conditions are going to be on Earth's day side, and so to some degree on the night side as well. So hopefully that helps. Okay. Colin says, apologies if not been asked before, what are your thoughts on the few studies exploring possible links between solar activity and cardiac disturbance in humans? Fascinating. That is my perfunctory response. It's fascinating. The concept of blood viscosity increasing during inclement space weather like geomagnetic disturbances is fascinating. The fact that our blood has iron in it and can be magnetized, and then when you have geomagnetic, you know, issues and you've got wiggles, high frequency wiggles of the magnetic field, the idea that our blood might be somehow affected or, you know, shaking, the dipoles trying to align because we've got iron, we've got, you know, I mean, hemoglobin's huge, right? It's a huge factor in our blood. And the idea that platelet and and coagulation increases during inclement space weather, it blows my mind because you can actually envision a mechanism. Is it real? Don't know. And I will never diagnose nor treat. But what I will do is find peer-reviewed articles in this, like I said, in this database that I'm working with a lot of my patron VIPs. And we are putting together papers that are, like I said, peer-reviewed, but that also are savvy enough to not conflate a bunch of space weather phenomena and actually look at it in an intelligent way. Because, I mean, I can look at how someone has done an analysis and know whether or not their approach to space weather phenomena is correct. Will I know if they've done an approach medically correct? No, of course not. I'm not a medical doctor and I don't profess to be one. But I do know if they're trying to correlate geomagnetic issues and they're looking at solar flares on the sun, I know that that's not the way to do it. Or if they're looking at, you know, radiation storms, but they're trying to correlate, you know, something that doesn't necessarily produce radiation storms, coronal holes, let's say, and fast solar wind. I mean, that's not going to, the low energy particles and high energy particles, you can't do that kind of thing. So I can make quality judgments there. And hopefully doing those types of assessments and then putting papers in particular categories will help others when they really want to dig down into the medical aspects with their doctor to try to assess better what they may be suffering from. So that is still in the works. It's a very deep and intense thing that we're working with, and I'm actually soliciting even some graduate students that are helping out. So it's coming. It's just slow, but it's coming. So hopefully that answered that question. Okay, guys, I see paragraphs. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, I got to actually do some of this. I have not done a live feed for a long time, I know. And so I see it quite dramatically. You guys are all over wanting to talk to me. All right, let me do something here. I'm going to loop this. What I want to show you, as I was mentioning before, I'm going to show you this is the solar storm from the X flare, right? During the X flare. It is not the X flare. This solar storm is not an X-rated solar storm, okay? Do not associate X with a solar storm with a coronal mass ejection, which is what we're looking at, because it's not. You'll confuse yourself and you'll get yourself in trouble. Just because you had an X-class flare and a coronal mass ejection, a big solar storm was launched at the same time, does not say that that solar storm is going to be what we call geoeffective, okay? And that's what we're dealing with. So when this thing comes by, again, I will stop it. So you can see it launched here, and I'll explain what this, if you guys are not familiar with this, I'll stop it right here. This is Enlil, this is NASA, or NOAA's version of the model, and you're looking down at the sun's north pole, okay, with this in this disk, and this is density, this is velocity, same panels, it's just that you're looking at speed of the structure here, you're looking at density of the structure here. And this panel, these two are again the same panels, but again density and speed, you're looking now down at the North Pole from here. So you can see the sun's North Pole and South Pole, as well as Earth, okay, North Pole and then South Pole, okay. So you're seeing what we call a meridional or meridional, however you want to pronounce it, cut through the structure, or through this plane, this Earth-Sun line right here, okay. So you can see the structure mainly is going to the east of Earth. The apex of this structure is essentially in here somewhere, okay. The flank of this structure is what's hitting Earth. This is what we call the leg. This is why you'll see when I talk about it, this is the part of the structure that is kind of looping back to the sun. It will have a lot of what we call radial fields. So you'll see a lot of X and Y direction. Not a lot of Z direction, but a lot of X and Y, because the thing you're catching the magnetic field lines that are coming back to the sun. And so when this structure actually hits Earth, you're just getting the wispy side of it, okay? So it doesn't matter that this solar flare was a big X-class flare. The solar storm was not aimed at Earth, okay? And on top of that, what makes it worse, by the way, this was a really decent prediction, at least when SWPC reran it, this one here. They reran it, and it didn't do a bad job in terms of judging when the solar storm hit Earth. They did a pretty good job. Let me see here. Where's my... And I've got to make sure I can grab it without killing it here. Okay. So what I want to show you... Okay, and I probably should have had it black instead of white, but oh well. Hopefully you guys can deal with this. So what you're looking at here is the solar wind. Now don't let this scare you. What I want you to focus on is this panel, okay? And I mean, I can slide up so you can see how many days we're looking at for just a second. If you ever see this on Space Weather Prediction Center's site, you go here. This is where you actually see the dates. So in this case, I'm looking at about 7 days worth of data, and I'll show you why in a sec. So this is the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th, and now we're coming up to the 21st, okay? And I want you to look at this one panel, because this is the magnetic field panel, okay? And right now I have, okay, time is going this way, okay? Magnetic field is going positive, positive this way, negative this way, okay? And I've got two traces on here. See the black and the red? Okay, right, all the way. So I've got two traces. One of them is the total magnetic field. So this is just how strong is the field. That's the black trace. Okay, it goes up, it goes down. Okay, it will never go lower than 0 because strength is only zero strength is weak, right? Then it can only go up. But it also has a direction, okay? And that's what some of these other vectors are, these other colors are. Red is the Z component. That's the north-south component. North is positive, south is negative, okay? So as you see, this goes positive or negative. For the Earth's magnetic shield, if you want to have a magnet that's coming from the sun and you want it to link up with the Earth's magnetic shield, just like with fridge magnets, they have to be opposite polarities in order for them to click together, right? Otherwise, you get bumper cars. If you've ever taken fridge magnets and pushed the two of them together and they don't want to go together, well, that's because the polarity is the same. If you flip it over, they click, okay? This is the same kind of thing we have with solar storms that come from our sun that interact with Earth. They either will click or they won't. They'll repel and bumper car, okay? Back on, and so what matters, what is the key here is this red line, sadly. It has to be southward. It has to be negative, okay, in order for it to have the right magnetic configuration to click with our own Earth's magnetic shield, and so it could pump all of its energy. What happens is that you have two magnetic isolated systems, and if one of the polarities is upside down, well, they shake hands really well, and then they can become one entire magnetic system, and so that system that is this big solar storm now can pump all of its junk, all of its material into the Earth's system, and the Earth's system is this teeny tiny thing, and it's getting slammed, overfilling a cup, and it's doing one of these, and it has to pump all that stuff into the exhaust system, which is our upper atmosphere. Our upper atmosphere protects us, okay? That's why you get aurora. Aurora is really the Earth's magnetic shield letting off steam. Seems silly, but we get to go, wow, pretty, right? Don't worry if you're on the ground. No, you're not getting bombarded by particles. These are low energy particles. These aren't anything that are high enough energy that can penetrate all the way to the atmosphere. I mean, all the way to the ground from the upper atmosphere. They stop way up there. So you get to look at it in absolute and utter safety, okay? So don't worry about aurora hurting you. It will never hurt you. Okay, so what I wanted to show you is that if you notice, there's two disturbances. There's this one, or kind of this cone that bumps up here. And then there's this little guy over here, okay? This guy, this was the Valentine's Day storm, okay? It was part of a coronal mass ejection along with some fast solar wind. And basically, from the sun's perspective, when you looked at it, it was a nothing burger, right? It just kind of launched and I was dealing with polar vortex issues at that time, and I decided, you know what, I'm not going to even bother posting that this storm got launched because I was afraid everybody was going to freak out and go into another piece of the sun is falling off. It's like, no, okay, don't do that to me again. So I just stayed kind of quiet about this one. Turned out, however, I probably shouldn't have, because look at how long this magnetic field just stayed south. It just stayed at about 10 nanotesla southward. That's strong south for a magnetic field of a solar storm. And in fact, if I slide back down and you look at the day, it stayed solid south for almost an entire day. I mean, that's a long time, okay? The reason why it wasn't a bigger deal, why I didn't get like crazy or excited about it, was because the speed of the structure was really slow. It was like 350 kilometers a second. If it had been above 400 kilometers a second, trust me, we would be seeing reports of the Valentine's Day storm all over the place, because the aurora would have gotten easily down into places like Colorado, places like, we've seen it in New York, we would have seen it lots more. All we needed was about another 100 kilometers a second in speed. Okay. Sadly, that fast solar wind came later. So that solar storm that hit there was really slow, but it had a magic amount of southward magnetic field. That is what drove the colors, okay? It's not the Earth's weakening field. As a matter of fact, looking at polar aurora is really not how you tell. Not telling colors really are not how you tell. How you tell is by looking at the magnetic anomalies that we have on Earth and see how they're changing. That's how you can tell how the Earth's magnetic field is changing. Colors are really, really driven by solar wind parameters, not driven necessarily by the Earth's magnetic shield. And remember, for those of you who are chemists, these are quantized. The amount of energy that comes down to interact with the Earth's upper atmosphere and cause these aurora in their specific colors, they're quantized. The amount of energy is dictated, the amount of energy that can cause an aurora is dictated by the bonds that are changing inside these in this case, oxygen. In fact, the red aurora is actually driven typically at a higher altitude than the green aurora. So those of you who say, oh, it's penetrating further and therefore the red aurora, it's lighting up because the particles can penetrate further. No, red aurora actually is created at the tops. They call it the flame tops of the curtains, of the auroral curtains. The green, which is and it's actually the higher energy stuff, the green is actually low stuff. So people who say that red aurora appears because of this weakening magnetic shield, well, really, if that were the case, then you should be seeing more green aurora, and it should be brightening as well. Not really the case. Again, the color of the aurora is dictated far more by the energy of the particles and the fluxes, and the red aurora is actually driven mainly by the type of non-stop, sustained, what we call sustained reconnection. That's how you can get this kind of thing going during a big geomagnetic storm. You don't get this typically with substorms. They don't last all that long, but you have a sustained southward magnetic field, you're going to see red get really beautiful, okay, over time. And then notice the second part of the storm, we actually got look at this, 20 nanotesla up here, okay? And we got down here, look, we got pockets of really sustained, really deep southward fields at 15, almost 20 nanotesla, okay? Strong south. Get me? This is what causes red. And it has happened cycle after cycle after cycle. We are ramping up to solar cycle 25 maximum. Therefore, storms are getting stronger, okay? Red aurora is going to happen more, okay? That's why you see red aurora. It is not dangerous. Please don't go off the deep end thinking it's dangerous. It is perfectly normal. And we see it every single time we have big storms. Okay? And this wasn't even all that strong, but we had strongly southward fields. And that's what does it. It's what I always call storm time aurora, because we have strong sustained fields. See this guy? Doesn't look like much compared to this, does it? In fact, where's the southward field? Not really existing, is it? This is our cute little solar storm from the X-flare. Look at it, isn't it cute? It's just so cute. It's not doing anything though. It's a bumper car, okay? And it doesn't matter. I mean, I could zoom in, but what I'll show you is I'll show you BY. That's blue. Here we had lots of BY all over, but we also had lots of BZ. The blue trace here, see how strong it is? It's almost as tall as the black trace, whereas the red trace is at 0. This is field that's not pointing north or south. It's pointing what we call radially. In this case, it's radially back, and I can do the same thing with X. I'm going to take off the red field now and give you the purple field. That's X. That's the radial field directly. This is telling us we're in the leg of the structure, okay? And that's what's strong. We're not getting, and I'll take these both off, and you can see the Z, the red component is hovering right around 0, which is this solid line. So we're just not going to get much from this solar storm, and I really don't think we're going to. This thing has been going on for almost a day now. See down here, February 20th to 21st, if I go and I take it all the way up to this section. 3/4 of a day and we still haven't seen anything. I hate to tell you guys, but I think it's just a fizzle. The sad thing is the speed's a little bit better. We're seeing a speed of about 450, unlike this guy, which was really, slow speed. This one actually has a higher speed, but it just doesn't have the magnetic field component. Okay, so Valentine's Day storm, despite being a much smaller storm and kind of like not that big a deal at the sun, right? It actually was enhanced by a fast solar wind stream at the tail end of it. That's what made it linger for a while. But what started it off was this really slow but very southward pointing magnetic field. Okay, and that's what gave us the red aurora. Regarding this structure, though, again, with this guy, we knew it was going to be coming at us. Oop, let's not go backwards. We knew, I mean, I told you about the EIT wave, right? But also even in coronagraphs, when we saw this big blast, it was more than half of the sun. And you can actually see that the part of the halo, wait till before it restart again, and it blows out. You'll see part of that halo right here. So you actually get, and actually, I think, you know what I'm thinking? Hold on. Is that the wrong halo? It might be the wrong one. Previous. Oh, it is. Looks like we didn't get it. This is the halo. That's what I'm looking for, this halo. So this is the structure. I believe this is the halo we were looking for because the X-class flare occurred just late on the 17th. So right by the 18th we were seeing it. And it went way past center disk. So that's how we knew the structure was going to hit us. And that EIT blast wave, I knew it had a really good chance of hitting us. And that's why you also saw the NASA and NOAA models showing that as well. They get all that information from there. And of course from stereo as well. Now, what else did I want to show? Oh, no. There we go. Now, one thing I want to show you guys is for aurora photographers who feel sad about this solar storm not living up to all the hype because it came from an X-class flare, don't worry. There's going to be more chances. Okay, so what we're looking at now is the far side. Ever since stereo kind of rotated to, has now in its orbit kind of come back around to Earth's front side, well, we got to go back to helioseismology, right? So this is the helioseismology instrument on SDO, part of the HMI suite from JSOC. And the gray areas are, remember I showed you the HMI instrument, I showed you the red and blue, right? This is the black and white version. The gray is like the black and white version of those red and blue spots. Okay, so you're seeing sunspots here, and you're seeing the magnetic polarity of those sunspots, red and black. I mean, white and black is like red and blue. And so this is on the day side of Earth. And what's in gold is the helioseismology, basically the seismic sounding of the sun. And when there's a seismic sounding of the sun, we can actually determine where strong magnetic regions are on the far side. And so they show up as black in this case. That's how they've colored it. Okay, so what's nice to know is that we actually do have a few of these regions, and I'll probably come over here, yet to go. Okay, so when that's true, this is a movie, so I can't stop it, but I'll let it play one more time. And we do have a few regions that were on the front side that will survive their far side passage. And this is what we're going to be seeing in the next few days as they rotate, back into view. That one region that let off that beautiful solar storm event on the 18th, that's this region here, or part of these regions in here. And so they look like they've definitely survived. So it'll be very interesting to see what they, if there's more than one, if it's a cluster, I can't really tell. And then on top of that, we do have another really strong dark region that I think might be new, because this region here clears out on the day side. It clears out, maybe it's in here. If not, we'll take a look. What we do is I just put my finger there and go, okay, does this go dark? Yes, it goes dark. So that's part of that. So this is going to be a returning region. If I go back to the page right before this, we can actually see that stuff mapped out. So here's what you were looking at. And I was saying, hey, big bright region, or big dark region, right? That's the one. So what we can actually do, if you ever go to the JSOC seismic monitor, here they actually label. So again, this is the day side of Earth right now with all its magnetic markers. This is the helioseismology sounding, and then these are the patches that they've come up with through helioseismology, and they've labeled them these really awful names. The reason why this is useful is because not only you can get color codes, right? So purple goes to purple, right? Red goes to red, right? Yellow goes to yellow. And so you can color code and have an idea of what these regions are, but then you can actually go down to this little nasty thing. Sorry that it's made more for scientists than it is for people, or maybe for laymen, but you have those same ugly names down here, right? You can see 25, 27, 29, we were just looking at those. And what's cool about it is that you can see the strength. So this is the magnetic field strength. And so you can see where the really strong ones are, okay? Like 1961, that's region 28. 30 shows 3571, that's a strong. So 28 and 30 are strong, and then 32 and 31 are strong. See? Okay? So think 20, 28, 28 and 30, 31 and 32. 28 and 30, 31 and 32. 28 is the red guy, and 30 is the green guy. So these guys are about to rotate into view. And then 31 and 32, both of them. So these are really strong regions, okay, that have yet to rotate into view. And you can, and this guy here is not strong anymore because he's already partially rotated into view. He was one of the stronger ones a few days ago. That's the one, that's the region where the big solar storm was launched on the 18th. But when you take a look at that, you can actually see in here how many days it's going to be. Days from East Limb in Earth view. So in some cases, when you have, what, 28 and 30, we've got about 3 days. And because those regions are strong, amateur radio operators, 3 days. And you'll watch that solar flux come back up. And then it'll continue to go up because we've got even bigger regions that'll be coming in about 6 or 7 days from now. Because the two biggest regions will be coming back into view in about a week, okay? So that solar flux is really going to stay up. And aurora photographers, yes, more regions rotating into view, so you'll get another chance in about a week or so to see whether or not we get more possible solar storm launches, okay? Some of these regions that we've seen come into view kind of blew their load, their wad, whatever you want to call it, before they rotated into view. And so I'm afraid they're going to be kind of quiet on Earth's day side over this next week. And so we may not be getting much from these regions, but we'll be paying attention to them just in case. So, but there are some really good stuff. There's some really good stuff still going on the sun's far side. And so this isn't going to die down. We don't have a quiet side of the sun anymore, thank goodness. So hopefully that, I'm trying to see if there's anything else I have on my list. Oh yeah, one more thing. I won't show the KP. I probably don't need to. For those of you who are interested, when I say how do you monitor magnetic anomalies on the sun for aurora or for the weakening Earth's magnetic field? It's very easy, actually. The South Atlantic anomaly, that's what this is. It's a part of the magnetic field that's weakening. It allows particles to precipitate more, and you can get aurora and air glow a lot more readily than we ever used to. And because these regions are actually beginning to migrate toward Hawaii, see that you're getting a little bit of a weakness, it's beginning to migrate toward Hawaii, and over in Chile, you get a lot. We're seeing a lot more. Oh, here's the new one. Sorry, I should have done this. So here's the old, I was wondering why it wasn't migrating enough. Here's the old way it looked, okay? And here's the new way. See how close Hawaii is? Hawaii can actually look and see visibly air glow and aurora, okay, from this region now. And they know it's this because they can only see it southward, they don't see it northward. So in low latitudes, those of you who have taken my mini courses and have heard me talk about the Earth's magnetic shield reversing, that it's only the dipole component of the field that's reversing, and then what's going to happen is that we're probably going to see other poles crop up, other places where we're going to get aurora at mid-latitudes, possibly even Hawaii. It's happening, okay? And what you can see, this paper, I'll show you this paper in just a sec, the title of it and everything. It's actually done by Chinese, which I know they get a bad rap right now, but their scientists are still pretty cool. So here is aurora and air glow in Chile. And this was storm time. This is during geomagnetic storms. So during big storms, you can actually get this at low latitudes in these anomalies. There's the SAA and the EIT anomaly, or the EIA anomaly. Look at that. And that is not just air glow, guys. This is aurora. Oh, and guess what color it is? It's red. During storm time, right? During geomagnetic storms, you're going to get red aurora. But it's not the color of the aurora that makes it a marker of the Earth's magnetic field weakening. It is the location, okay? We're going to get these, we're going to start getting more of this at lower latitudes, okay? And so people at lower latitudes are going to be able to see it. If you want to know what this paper is, the name of this paper, and this is just one I found recently that did, I thought, a pretty good job. Equatorial aurora, aurora-like air glow in the negative magnetic anomaly. And they talk about both the South Atlantic anomaly and the EIA anomaly, which is the is it European? Gosh, European ionospheric anomaly? Eastern ionospheric, oh goodness gracious, I forget. I apologize. Do they talk about it in here? In their abstract? I forget. So this is an area that I'm going to be learning more about. I mean, I told you guys that I would start learning more about this, these types of phenomena as we got closer to magnetic pole flipping. Obviously, magnetic pole flipping is not going to happen in our lifetimes, but it looks like there's enough funding and enough interest in the work now that people are beginning to get money to study it, and that's really how we're going to make progress. And hopefully, work like this will continue to spur other scientists and other magnetospheric physicists to want to do more work on it. Because my goodness, when the Earth's dipole magnetic field component flips, we are going to have a heck of a lot of fun trying to design CONOPS and satellites, payloads and buses for different orbits, because we're not going to know where the radiation belts are. They're going to potentially reconfigure. So it's might be the wild, wild west for a little while out in the near-Earth environment, which will be really challenging. We'll just have to see. But I'm looking forward to seeing more of these types of studies in the literature, and hopefully that's going to continue. So hopefully that will help kind of jumpstart some of you guys to get you to look in the right areas. But just like I said, the poles will begin to, you'll just start having more of these weakened areas in the Earth's magnetic shield show things like aurora, because particles will be able to precipitate. We'll actually have loss cones that get larger. And so, we're going to start seeing more of that. It is perfectly normal. Do not worry. The sun does this every 11 years. We have a multipolar sun every 11 years. The Earth knows what it's doing. It can do the same thing. And it will not, this is not Armageddon. Please stop thinking, stop paying attention to the YouTube hype. Earth has done this many times, and life has survived. This is old hat for the Earth. Okay, it's just new to us. Okay, how do you know the pole flip won't be in our lifetime? Because of the rate of change. I mean, and looking at ice cores and looking at historical records, these pole flips take a long time. And remember, it's not the entirety of the Earth's magnetic field. It's just the dipole component. Okay, so when the dipole component flips, the whole field doesn't go to zero. No, suddenly you see the quadrupole field and the octupole field. I mean, those fields are still there. It's only the dipole component that is flipping. So there's these underlying fields that will be exposed, and they're more complicated. That's why we're going to go to a multipolar field configuration, just like the sun does. When the sun's magnetic field flips, which it's doing right now, okay? I mean, it's literally going into the pole flip right now. That's solar maximum, okay? You have no dipole field component. The sun still has a ton of magnetic field. It's just multipolar. It's just more complicated. It's not as smooth and pretty as it is during solar minimum. Solar minimum is why it goes quiet, is because it's not, everything's quiet. And the dipole field is really well formed. But at solar maximum, the dipole field is literally, the sun is like a lava lamp magnetically. And so you have lots of eruptions from all sorts of locations, because your magnetic configuration is so different, and you have poles everywhere. That's what the Earth is going through. It's just going through it much, much more slowly. And we have historic records of this. So it's not, as much as we'd love to think that it's going to be something that's going to happen quickly and we can see it, yeah, probably not. You're going to be doing pole chasing your whole life, and you'll watch these equatorial auroral bands widen and get deeper and prettier and things like that. And possibly with the advent of cell phone CCDs becoming so incredibly sensitive, maybe soon if you decide to go to, have a vacation in Hawaii and you look to the south with a really super sensitive CCD camera on your cell phone and take long exposures during a geomagnetic storm, you might actually pick it up. I have no idea if it's going to be that strong. We'll just have to see. But it's just another neat phenomenon, okay? But it's aurora. It's not Armageddon. It's not apocalypse. It's absolutely normal, and the Earth has done this many times. So, okay. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. Yeah, this whole pole flipping and kill shot and all this stuff just drives me crazy. And then people say, oh, you're working for the government and you're hiding things. No, I'm not. I don't work for the government. I am literally government free now. I retired from aerospace. I don't do that. So, there's no one trying to pull my chain. I'm literally saying this stuff because I love space weather, and I have, a big skill set in this arena. If I am scared, you will know, right? And I'm not. Obviously, you can tell I'm not scared. This kind of thing, I think it's fascinating, and we should embrace it, and and stop trying to keep everybody on pins and needles and feel that they're gonna, that the world is going to end every 2 seconds, because it's just scary. Anyway, okay. What would be interesting? Joe says, what would be interesting is if the Earth's crust suddenly pulls loose from the magma. No, it's like a piece of the sun breaking off. Yeah, not going to happen. But you'll read it in the headlines tomorrow. That's what I have a feeling it happens in people's minds far more often than it happens in real life. And if anybody is even thinking it, the media is going to print it. So this is why it's so important for us to be able to talk in a lucid fashion about space weather, because these types of headlines, they don't do us any good other than making people more aware of space weather. And eventually people will realize that space weather, just like terrestrial weather, used to scare the bejesus out of people, right, way back when. Space weather's in that same kind of time, it's at that same point in its history, right? We used to be very, very scared as people who didn't have satellites and didn't have the modern technology. We would be very, very frightened of terrestrial weather events like hurricanes and horrible snowfalls and bomb cyclones and things like that. We would be petrified that it's the god's wrath or something like that. Space weather is going through exactly that same phase in history right now, where everybody thinks it's the end of the world. And terrestrial weather can teach us many things, especially how it affects us as a culture, right, as a society. We have lots of scary stories in our history about terrestrial weather events. And as we learn more about them, we realized, oh, it's not that big a deal. These things are, they happen, and we can mitigate through them, and we can prepare for them, and we can survive them very easily. And now, you get it as an app on your phone. Okay, this is what's going to happen today. Well, great. The same kind of thing is going to happen with space weather. And as we become even more technologically advanced, we'll start seeing the impacts of space weather to a greater degree. And that will just get us to understand the realities that are space weather and what is fear-mongering. And that's really where I want us to get to. Okay, so is there effects of our Earth's magnetic pole field, pole flipping? Sure there are. Of course there are. But should you be afraid of them? No, not at all. I've been talking about them for years, that this is how they were going to show up. And indeed, this is how they're showing up. It's not red aurora. Red aurora has been with us since the dawn of time. Okay. Hopefully that answers a lot of questions that people have had, both about the X-flare, conflating X-flare and the X factor with a solar storm. This is a perfect example of how you cannot do that, and don't do that. A solar flare is a solar flare. A solar storm is a solar storm, right? Solar flare, coronal mass ejection, not the same thing. Just because one's big, the other can be teeny tiny, wimpy wimpy, and that's what we saw here. Okay, and these are the two main things I really wanted to make sure I tackled today in this extended little chat. Okay, let's see. Phil says, love watching these informal updates. I learned so much, and it's good to be able to know, to tell others, not to buy into the sky is falling, and to say why. Exactly. That's what I want to do. I want to arm you guys with solid information, so that you know, I don't like it when people have knots in the pit of their stomach. This is not the way you're supposed to live your life, right? And space weather can be a beautiful phenomenon. It really can be, and it should be enjoyed, not feared. And the amount of fear mongering on YouTube is just, I think it's at an all-time high. It's just, I just don't understand it. But I will never do that, guys. I will never do that to you. Wendy says, if it's going to rain when you take an umbrella, soon more will know what to do during solar storms. Exactly. And yes, Steffi says, historically folks lost their minds over comets. Right, we called things out at the end of times. Exactly. There are example after example after example of this. And the problem is that space is so scary, right? I mean, you look up there and that's the unknown, right? You know, down here is home and up there is not. And, you know, there's all sorts of creepy things up there. And it's dark and it's void and you can't breathe. And, you know, Sandra Bullock almost died up there. And you know, right, you can think of pretty much every single Hollywood film that's gone up about space. It's terrifying. And so we internalize all that stuff. And so it becomes a real problem. And so we're not rational when it comes to things from space, and space weather is part of that, right? So we need to kind of, like, you know, put our big panties on. Some of my friends says, put my big girl panties on, and just, you know, realize that it's not. If there were that many terrors waiting out there for us, it would all have been over long ago. Right? I mean, we've survived quite a long time through many, many cycles. I mean, we only started counting 25 cycles ago, right? And there were many cycles prior to that. And wow, somehow we've managed to survive them. Even the Miyake events, people are like, oh, these things are massive events. That, you know, these are the micronova things, or these are the super gamma ray bursts, and they're just going to take out the planet. And it's like, well, but if we know about them, then obviously they didn't take us out. So if the tree survived when you're looking at the tree rings, then obviously it wasn't as bad as you think. Okay, there's an historical marker for it, granted, but look, the tree's still here. So, you know, it's we just need to be a bit more rational about these things, and I think social media sometimes doesn't allow us to be so. So anyway, you're very welcome, Hummingbird. I appreciate that. Dave says, I would be more worried about a meteor. You lived from a meteor crater and you did the construction. Luckily, Jupiter swept them all out. That's the one nice thing, is Jupiter really was the vacuum cleaner of the solar system. It's kind of nice to have an almost star next to our star. We don't have a binary star system, but that big massive thing that is Jupiter, just, you know, if you remember Shoemaker-Levy, right? People say, oh, that could happen to Earth. Well, likely not. The reason why it happened to Jupiter is because Jupiter is the Hoover of the solar system. Its gravity is so much more intense than Earth. Earth just kind of ducks and the comets go by. Why? Because they're getting hoovered by Jupiter, right? So that's why Jupiter got hit by a comet, right? That's why the sun, you know, there's so many sun diving comets, right? Because it's a massive thing. It's not going to hit Earth. It's going to dive into the bigger, much more gravitationally powerful objects. You know, and that's just a fact. And so people get super scared about stuff when they don't realize that the reason why they're seeing these events happening on other celestial bodies is because those celestial bodies were designed to be hit by them. They're you know, simply because of the physics that's involved. And Earth is pretty safe, you know. Anyway, okay, guys. Any other really big questions? Let's see. Art. Hi, Art. Here's a Millersville student right there. Art Grabensk. If I'm saying your last name correctly. I think that's the first time I've ever tried to pronounce your last name. So it reminds me of how the cavemen looked up at the sky, pointed and yelled, ooh, ooh, yeah, yeah. Hey, you know, they survived, right? So it tells you we've been here for a long time. Yeah, Jupiter Hoover, right, Steffi? That's exactly right. This is why we saw Shoemaker Levy on Jupiter and not here at Earth. It's been many, many, you know, what is the, I forget what the name you call it when it's like thousands upon thousands of years. There's like a name for it. I forget what it is. But it's been so many years, so many thousands of years since we've had, if not, you know, hundreds of thousands of years since we've had these massive craters. When the solar system was much younger, right, and there was a lot more rocks around. Yeah, okay, there was a lot of refacing of all of the planets and whatnot, and the ones that were geologically active had most of their craters, you know, erased over time. But really, the only ones that are left anymore are that get hit are the big hoovers of the solar system, which are the Sun and Jupiter and sometimes Saturn, but mainly Jupiter. Okay, eons. Is that what it is? Eons? I thought that was too long. Millennia? Yeah. I guess I could have said millennia. Thank you guys. All right. So, oh, thank you, Jay. I appreciate that. Bestest space weather lady ever. Thank you. Hopefully, you know, this brings the temperature down a little bit for everybody and makes you feel a bit, you know, more calm and lets you laugh and enjoy space weather for what it is and not worry about the end of times. Colin says, can ejection take the form of a toroid? Oh, my goodness. You know, that is a really good question. We actually have models of toroids. Mirabashi-san is one author I'm thinking of who does toroidal models. So does Vandas et al. They did space weather, you know, coronal mass ejections as toroidal as opposed to a cylindrical or a bent cylinder. And most of the time we think that of these structures coming off of the sun and having their legs still attached to the sun. Can they disconnect? Yes, Jack Gosling showed that many times. We do get disconnections, but can the whole thing, we can have independent, like one or so field lines or, you know, little field lines here and there. Dave Lario shows this too. There are ways that we can tell that certain field lines have been disconnected from the sun. Has to do with the kind of electrons that stream back and forth along the field lines. And if they're connected to the sun, you're always going to get what we call essentially outward counter-streaming or outwardly streaming electrons from the field, you know, from basically coming from the sun, streaming outward. If they're disconnected, well, that you lose that source, because if they're not connected to the sun anymore, you're not going to get that beam. You're going to get a much weaker beam, and it could be bidirectional. There's all sorts of things that can happen, or you can sometimes even get what we call flux dropouts. So we know that certain field lines do get disconnected. We do know that there are reconnections in the solar wind where the magnetic field will reconnect with the ambient solar wind. But can it reconnect or disconnect the entire system so that it becomes just this toroidal bubble, completely you know, just like independent and just kind of floating around in the solar wind, convecting out? I don't think we've ever had that. But my goodness, you know, so the Parker Solar Probe has shown us so much of what's going on so close to the sun with the solar wind that we never knew before. And the solar wind really close to the sun is extremely ratty and looks very different than what we see at Earth. That I would not rule anything out at this point. I think lots of our understanding of magnetic reconnection in and around the sun is changing dramatically. We're realizing that the solar wind very close to the sun looks very much like the magnetic carpet that we've always envisioned, you know, looked at the sun and looked at the surface of the sun and the chromosphere and everything. And the solar wind is at least near the sun, is almost as complex as what it is, as what the surface of the sun magnetically looks like. So I wouldn't even, at this point, I wouldn't even venture a guess. But we have successfully modeled these structures using toroidal configurations because they look very similar to the slinky kind of configuration that others use. So your guess is as good as mine. Until we have lots of spacecraft really close to the sun and you know, out of the ecliptic plane, and you know, we just have like, I don't have to have necessarily a constellation of them, but a lot more than we have now. Most of our spacecraft measurements are single point, meaning there's one spacecraft sitting right there, and then the next spacecraft is, you know, hell and gone, and it isn't even observing the same structure. And so that makes our understanding of the solar wind and what we call our heliosphere, it makes it a lot harder, because single point measurements are like a needle through the haystack, right? How much, if you were a needle, if you could, your vision was only as thin as a needle going through a big haystack, do you think you get a very good impression of what the haystack looked like or what its structure was? Probably not. And that's really a good analogy of what we deal with when we send these spacecraft out to, you know, out in the solar wind or even to the sun. It's very difficult when we sample what we call in situ measurements, where we're sampling the stuff that's coming past us. It gives us a very, very minute view, a very, very small smattering of what is actually going on. And then we just try to piece it together through reverse engineering and then looking at images and trying to, you know, throw theory in there as well and see what holds together and what falls away. But that's science, right? So, okay, guys, that's my computer saying, yes, you've been on here too long. So I'll take maybe one more question. A real Starlink, oh, that's cute. Yeah, right, that'd be great, Wendy, a real Starlink system. We do need that. We also need spacecraft flying out of the ecliptic plane. We really need that very badly. That was the whole intention of when I did the solar polar vortex thing, was I was trying to emphasize the fact that we need polar orbiters looking down at the sun to give us a better feel for what our magnetic field is on the sun. Does Parker Solar Probe provide useful information for solar science? Yes, it does. Absolutely. Like I said, it's just like anything else. Pretty much everything new ends up answering lots of questions that we had, but then it asks more questions than it answers. That's how new our field is that we absolutely are in a place where we're finding that there are far more things that we don't know than things that we do. And things that we didn't know, some of them we knew well enough that we were able to button up that particular topic, but then it just opens a whole nother door. And then some things it just completely blows well accepted theories right out of the water. But, you know, again, that is science for you. And that's why sending new missions is always so important, because we're never going to get a handle on space weather if we don't better understand our star and the solar wind that comes streaming out of it. So, okay. Oh, thank you, Stephen. I could listen to you all day. Oh, thank you. I'm so knowledgeable about the sun. Well, there are scientists out there who would argue with you and me, and we do. We argue quite a bit. That's so funny. Okay. All right, guys. Jerry's telling me time to wrap it up, and I agree. Ulysses, by the way, has not been. Yeah, the Ulysses mission needs replacing. I agree. We need another polar orbiter, but this time there needs to be imagers on it and an HMI. We need to be able to image the poles of the sun. Ulysses had in situ measurements only, so we never got a good imager on it. All right, guys, have a good one. I'm glad you enjoyed this, and yeah, just you know, don't worry about this solar storm. Everything's cool. Okay. All right. Talk to you soon.